Hello, students. So let's go ahead and jump into middle childhood. So again, we're going to be talking about the school age years. So between the ages of 6 to 11, we're going to see that our kids are not going to stretch as much as they did in that early childhood years, so slower growth during this time frame. One of the things we are concerned about during this time will be children and tooth decay. We mentioned that earlier. So 75% of our kids are seeing a dentist. However, that means 25% are not. And that's a really, really big number when you consider how many children we actually have in the US. Children from low-income homes are definitely less likely to see a dentist. So again, something we need to be concerned about. Our kids their growth is slower. However, they are actually getting a lot stronger. This is the time when our kids are going to lose their teeth. I love this time frame with my kids. I love to see when their two front teeth were missing, as we see in this picture here. So our kids' teeth are going to come out. Their permanent teeth will be coming in. As a rule of thumb, we say that when kids lose all of their baby teeth and all of their permanent teeth are in, my daughter is 11 and she's just about there. Her last tooth just came out. That is when we might start to see puberty. So when all of the baby teeth are gone, all the permanent teeth come in, might signal some changes. We'll talk about puberty in our next stage next week. All right, so play for kids. Unfortunately, we're going to see that our kids are not outside playing as much as they used to be, and definitely as much as they should. And one of the reasons is definitely going to be because we have electronics and we have screen time. So even though it says here watching 4 hours of TV per day is associated with health problems in later life, I'm actually going to say 4 hours of screen time, right? Because kids don't necessarily need to be watching TV. They could be playing PlayStation for 4 hours, or they could be watching things on their screen. So any type of screen time for that amount of time, again, the body is not moving. You're stationary, and that's not healthy. Again, another problem that we see is that PE is really not required in the way it used to be in schools. So in schools, growing up, I had PE 5 days a week. Now PE has really been reduced. In most schools, it's 2 days a week. And it could be less in some, more in others, but physical activity has been one of those things that has been cut out because we're so focused on math and science and our kids catching up to where some of the other countries are in their rankings. And so we put a lot of focus on our PE or our academics, which really reduces PE. Another thing to be concerned about is sports. This is the time we tend to put our kids in t-ball and football and soccer and all these different sports. And some things to be concerned about, again, are going to be just how they deal with the high-pressure environment. And we want to make sure our kids don't lose self-esteem. So you don't want to have a coach that's berating your kids or yelling at them because they missed the ball, right? So just be concerned about that as a parent. Earlier, we talked about the BMI, or the body mass index. Again, from that BMI, we see that we have 18, almost 20% of our kids, not adults, our 6 to 11-year-olds are in the obese category. And that's a very unhealthy number. So again, something we need to watch out for. Obesity now causes more deaths worldwide than malnutrition. So in other words, people are dying more of obesity-related issues than they are being hungry. Then we have malnutrition. So that's a real common concern. Obesity has increased because it's common for our kids, again, to be stationary, to watch screens or television, and we let our kids drink a lot of sugary drinks. Soda being the main one, but I also say juices have a whole lot of sugar. So look at the labels when you have orange juice and apple juice and all those things. Look at the labels. There's usually sugar added. And we're talking a lot of grams. About 40 grams of sugar is a lot of sugar. So be careful. You don't want your kids to have drinks that have lots of sugar. All right, so let's talk about health issues. Asthma. Asthma is an inflammation of the airway, and we really see asthma manifest or come about in these middle school years. So we see that our kids in when they're in first, second, third grade, all these grades, we see them be exposed to more environmental hazards and more things that will cause that inflammation of the airways. Brain development. So again, kids definitely, as you see here looking at this picture, kids, all of us are really attracted to visual. We're attracted to screens because of the color and the visual identity we see. It just kind of, we're in a trance looking at it, right? And so you see, that's why kids like that. And there's nothing wrong with teachers demonstrating things on screens. We just want to make sure that our kids are not left to their own devices or left to stare at screens kind of endlessly without learning taking place. And what we know from Piaget is that brain development continues throughout life. And what that means is that it doesn't cease when we're 80. We are still learning things when we're 80 years old. Right, measuring IQ, the average IQ score is about 100. However, I'm going to say that I don't put a lot of stock personally into IQ tests. And there's some reasons for that. A big one is going to be that the IQ tests themselves are influenced by culture or influenced by whoever creates or designs the test. So consider, who do you think it is that develops tests that measure our IQ? Typically, they're going to be white males from Harvard and Stanford with very high IQs that may have different experiences in their backgrounds than you and I do. And that really influences the type of test questions that they're developing, because a test question may be relevant to them, but not to me, or I may not understand it well, right? Looking at the slide, you can see here that most of us fall into that, like I said, 100 range, although we have people like Einstein and others who were well above that. Now, looking again at school and school age years, we're looking at kids with special needs. So kids who have special needs, particularly ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This is a condition in which children have a lot of energy, so they're hyperactive, right? And they have a very difficult time focusing. It's very hard for them to give their full attention. Therefore, the classroom environment is difficult, because think about it. What do we do in the classroom? You have one teacher and 30 plus kids, and she wants them to sit down and work on their paper. And that's hard for some of these kids to do. They want to be up and about. They want to be using their energy. And it's hard for them to focus on an assignment or a paper for any length of time. And so these kids really flourish in an environment where they are hands-on, as you see in the picture, right? Hands-on activities are great. That's why some schools are really geared towards more special group assignments, instead of having the kids work on a lot of paper work, right? They do try to do more learning through hands-on activities, right? So we have seen an increase over the past decades for ADHD, right? And so there's some reasons for that, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the controversy behind ADHD. Kids with special needs, that controversy is really about whether or not we administer or give drugs to kids who have ADHD. Doctors are typically for drugs. Parents are typically against drugs, right? Ritalin is the #1 medication that is used to help kids with ADHD. Here's some of the issues here, is that we have to understand with any drug that we administer, we have to have the right dosage. So some parents complain that when they give their children Ritalin for ADHD, their kids become lethargic, or they become the opposite of HD, they become very withdrawn. Very, very just kind of lay there and not interested in things, and so that's concerning, because we want to have a happy medium. We want this child to have their own personality come out and be an active person, yet also help them to focus their attention and to not be overly hyper. And so there's some controversy here. You know, what I say is that I am for parents who choose not to use medication. However, if you choose not to use medication, then you have to do what we call behavioral therapy. Behavioral modification or behavior therapy is when you spend time with your child and you do activities with them in very short time frames. So for instance, as I mentioned to you, I work with a lot of different organizations that do mentoring work with kids. And one of the kids that I work with, his name is Chris, he has ADHD. And so what happens is he comes home from school and he is so far behind in his schoolwork that he's in 6th grade and he's reading at a 1st grade level. and he's in 6th grade. They keep passing him up even though he really can't accomplish the skills that a 6th grader should have at this point in time. So when he comes home from school, his mom says, sit down here and do your homework, and you're not going to get up and play until you do your homework. And Chris sits down and he looks at like 12 pages of homework because he didn't finish the work that he was supposed to do in class because he couldn't focus, and he's looking at that and all he feels is frustration because the papers look like another language to him. Because if he's reading at a 1st grade level, there's no way he can do 6th grade problems, right? And so for him, it's frustrating that he doesn't understand the work. It's frustrating. It makes him feel very discouraged and insignificant because he can't do the work. And so he just acts out. And so for mom, I have to explain to her that, Mom, if you don't want to use Ritalin, you need to use behavior therapy, which means mom sits down with Chris and mom actually helps him go through the problems and says, okay, Chris, number 1 is asking this. How could we do this problem? Let me help you. And mom spends about 10 minutes doing a few problems with Chris. And then Chris gets to go outside for about 15, 20 minutes for a break. And then they come back in and they can do another few problems. But that's behavior therapy. You have to spend time and understand that your child cannot sit down for 3 hours and do homework. And so again, with ADHD, there's a couple ways we can manage that, through medication or through some behavior therapy, but we need to pick one or the other, or else we're not doing a service for our child. All right, a learning disorder. So a learning disorder is very different from a physical disability. A learning disorder means that there's something going on cognitively in our brain that is preventing us from learning in the way that most of us learn, right? So it's a learning disorder. It prevents us from doing that. These can also come about because there's trauma in our life, because there's stress in our life. I think of all of the foster kids that I've worked with, I think all of them had what we call an IEP, or they had a learning disorder because of what they came from. We'll talk more about how we can work with that. One of the most other common diagnoses we see for kids with special needs is dyslexia. So dyslexia is this, what happens with dyslexia is that if you and I were to look at a paper, we typically read from left to right. A person who has dyslexia, when they look at the paper, the words are mixed up. They can't read from left to right. Their brain doesn't process what the eye is visually seeing. And so what happens is years back, we used to label children who had dyslexia as being mentally retarded or having some cognitive deficits. And that wasn't the case. We really have to learn that we can teach kids who have dyslexia we have to reteach the brain how to see the word so it makes sense. If you look at the picture here, we see this boy who's using these special glasses, and the glasses really cause our eyes to view the words in a particular order, the left to right order, which is what we want. And it prevents all those words from getting jumbled up so that they don't understand. Right? So dyslexia, the most common learning disability. Autism. So we have many kids who are autistic, and with autism, there's a whole spectrum. There are those who are very highly autistic and those who are lower on the spectrum. A couple of common issues you'll find with kids who are autistic is that they tend to have some social issues. So it's difficult for them to make some social interactions with others. Eye contact may be difficult. And also they tend to use these repetitive motions. So they may move their hand or their arm in a consistently repetitive way every day. And so again, for parents, again, dealing with kids with autism, it can be a real challenge for them. However, understand that autistic children can be brilliant, can be extremely intelligent. So by no means do they have kind of deficiencies cognitively. It's more that they have some difficulties in processing how they express themselves. All right, kids in special education. So this is very different from when I went to school. When I used to go to school, I knew that there was a certain classroom on my campus where that's where all of the special kids went to school. That's where they were. There was a special classroom. We no longer teach special ed kids in one classroom. So what we do is we have what we call LRE, least restrictive environment. This means that what we do is we basically mainstream our children with special needs today. So, for instance, in my daughter's elementary school class, all the way from first grade to fifth grade, she had one individual child there that was blind. She was blind. And this girl had an aide that joined her in class every day. So when my daughter and her classmates were learning math on the whiteboard, the aide was actually teaching the student that was blind. She had rocks on her desk, or she had different things on her desk where the girl would touch the different apparatus, the rocks or whatever they were, and she would actually do math that way. She would learn by feel. Right? But it taught the other kids in the class to have a real sensitivity to individuals with challenges, right? And so nowadays, we typically mainstream our kids with special needs. We no longer keep them in a certain classroom all to themselves. Another thing we find with kids with special needs is that they have an IEP. An IEP is an individual education plan. What this means is that since your child has some special needs, the school, by law, is required to make sure that your child learns. Therefore, we may need to, again, provide an aid one-on-one, or we may need to provide some additional tutoring services, or the school may need to provide other types of programs that will help your child to learn. Right? So I have been, again, with all of my foster kids I've mentored, even Chris that I've mentored, he has an IEP. And so you go to these meetings where the principal and the teacher and the parent and the student all get together and come up with a plan on what the school can do to meet your child's needs. That is required by law, only if your child has a special need. All right, let's go ahead and jump into chapter 12. So we'll talk here in chapter 12 about our middle childhood cognitive development, right? So let's talk about that. In this stage, we're going to see that kids are really, or Piaget would say, kids are going through what we call concrete operational thought. So remember, when kids were younger, they really learned using their senses. Your toddlers would feel things, they would eat things, right? They would smell things, and this is how they would learn. Now, we're getting really to where kids can do this concrete operational thought because they're going to start thinking logically, right? They're going to learn that 1 + 1 = 2, right? They're going to learn these things, and that's what concrete operational thought is. All right, here, again, think of third grade. Third grade, I used to substitute teach for third grade, and this is really when our kids learn their math facts. This is when parents at home are doing flashcards, right? So 4 × 1, 4 × 2, 4 × 3, 4 × 4. You're doing flashcards so your kids can learn their math facts and learn all about math. And this is when I would argue, this is the best time to teach your kids about money. Right? So one of the downfalls that parents really have is not taking this opportunity to teach kids that money is finite, meaning we only have a certain amount of it, and understanding debt, right? Because this is where, as adults, we get into some real negative consequences and making some mistakes with our money. And so here's where I believe either allowance or some type of a system where you are somehow getting money into your child's hands so that they can learn how to properly use that money. So for me, my children get allowance, and it definitely gets to be an expense as they get older. However, I tell my kids that they are responsible to buy their own treats. So if we are going to make a trip and stop at Baskin-Robbins ice cream, right? My kids can decide whether or not they want to use their allowance money to pay for their ice cream. Mom's not going to buy the ice cream, right? Because I'm teaching them that you can use your money for treats, or if, like my high schooler, right, my oldest daughter, she would want to save all her money to go to Forever 21 and buy all the clothes she could. So she could care less about ice cream, right? There's no way that my youngest was going to miss out on ice cream. And so you teach your kids that there is decisions to be made. This is when I say you really have to stick to your guns, because as parents, we tend to fall into the trap of giving a little bit. So I remember one time that my daughter, we went to the store, we went to Walmart to buy a Barbie. She had saved $15 from her allowance, and we're headed to Walmart for the Barbie, right? So we get to Walmart and we go down the aisle, and my daughter picks out the most beautiful, sparkly Mattel Barbie butterfly. She's got wings and she's got all kinds of accessories, and she is the prettiest, sparkliest thing ever, right? However, she's $17.99, right? And then Is that how much she's going to cost at the checkout line? Because I teach my kids about what? Teach them about sales tax. So she's $17.99 plus sales tax. So I tell my daughter, I'm sorry, honey, you only have $15 and she's $17.99 plus tax. Let's see what else we can find. So we journey on and I go down the aisle and, well, lo and behold, for $12.99, I find Equate Generic Barbie. Now, she comes with no accessories. She's not very sparkly. She's not really that pretty, but she's a basic Barbie. And she's $12.99. So plus tax, my daughter can definitely afford her. So I say to my little one, honey, we have a choice to make. We can either go to the checkout stand and leave the store today with Equate Generic Barbie, or we leave the store today with nothing, and we come back next week when you have $5 more and $20 total, and then you can purchase Mattel Sparkle Barbie for $17.99 plus tax, right? And what is your child going to say to you? But Mom, can't you just advance me the money? Can't you just give me the money and I'll pay you back? Right? I have to explain to my daughter that unfortunately Delta College does not give me an advance, right? I don't get to get an advance on my paycheck. Therefore, we really can't do advances. We only have a certain amount of money to spend. Now, hopefully your partner is not in the store with you, because what will your child do? Your child knows they can run to your partner and say, oh my, Dad or Mom, Mommy went out to give me the money and I only need a few more extra dollars. Can you please just loan me a few more extra dollars so I can get the pretty Barbie that I want, right? Now, this is when you give your partner the look, right? The look that says, don't you dare hand out any money. I'm teaching a lesson right now, right? And so they cannot give out any money. And your child has to make a choice. And that's where they learn about money. They learn to understand money is finite. We don't have unlimited resources, because that's what credit cards are. Credit cards are, I can buy it now and have it now, even though I can't pay for it now, right? And so I encourage you all to teach your kids about money, and in your reflection this week, you'll learn a little bit more. All right, so Vygotsky. Vygotsky, remember, is a social cultural theorist who really tells us that it's really about a child's environment, social environment in particular, that they learn, right? And so this is when he'll say that our kids start to talk to us and talk to their friends differently, right? I mean, if my child came home and said something to me like, yo, dude, when's lunch? Right? I would be like, you don't call your mom dude, right? But he calls his friends at school dude. And so we're going to notice that our kids will start to address us differently. And we have to learn that every single experience after your children are born teaches them something. That's when you take advantage of all of your car time, right? So you're driving in the car to dropping your kids off at school, or running them to soccer practice, or whatever you do. This is when you bring up conversations. What do you think about that? Or, honey, did you see that homeless person there? I'm so sad. That makes me sad. What do you think we could do in life to help people that are in need? Honey, what do you feel about that? Do you see that the litter that we have? Oh my goodness. You can start talking to them about things in the world that they see that you may just drive by in silence, but this is really your chance to be teaching. We've talked before about the information processing theory and how we sometimes equate our brain or our thinking processes to a computer. And we have to learn and understand that kids learn a variety of ways, right? For instance, this boy here that's on the streets of a different country, he may actually understand math better than your own kids, because he has learned that if I sell so many different bracelets, this is how much I charge the person, right? He's learned how to manipulate math, even though he may never have been in a formal math class. Our memory tends to go through 3 different stages: sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. The long-term memory is really what we're aiming for, because this is where we can store the information long-term and then hopefully retrieve it, right? Especially for this upcoming exam. Adjusting context or our vocabulary to context. So again, we kind of talked about how your kids are going to speak to you differently than they do others. Just think about the world of texting today, right? Texting is almost a whole nother language, right? Us older adults had to really learn what all of these codes mean, and yet young people seem to understand this language completely. All right, ELL is English language learners. So this has to do with individuals who typically did not have English as their first language. They are learning English. Therefore, their proficiency or mastery of English is low. We really used to call this ESL, English Second Language Learners, but we call it ELL, English Language Learners, and that's what that means. Those who are learning English, and in school, typically we pull those kids out for short times to help them with their English and their grammar. All right, learning a second language. So we said that early childhood is the primary time or the best time to have your kids learn a second language. Research really tells us that we don't really have a specific and clear way on which is the best approach, although there's various approaches to how to learn a second language. The immersion program. So the immersion program would be if you were to go to Germany for 6 months to learn German and you speak no German. We are going to drop you in Germany with a family that speaks no English, and we are going to immerse you. Think of being in a bathtub and submerging yourself. You are going to be immersed in the German culture. The family you're living with is German, all of the streets, all of the area, the culture is all German, and you are going to learn it because you got no choice, right? So you're living in a country abroad. Second language taught as a foreign tongue. So definitely teaching, your primary language is English possibly, and then we're teaching another language. And then bilingual schooling. We do have some schools even in Stockton that teach bilingually, both in 2 different languages. So various approaches to how to learn a second language, yet not a clear approach as to which is best. All right, differences in family or differences in language learning. So there is a strong correlation between academic achievement and what we call your SLS, and your exposure to words, right? So we mentioned if maybe your parents don't have a college education or even a high school education or education in English very well, then we may have it be where you're not exposed to a lot of words and a lot of learning. What we do know is that teachers and parents' expectations greatly impact your students' achievement. What this means is, if I, as a parent or a teacher, expect you to do well, if I have high expectations of all of my students that they will get an A in my class or that they will pass well, then they want to meet that expectation. So even if the parents maybe don't have high education, your parents expect you to do well in school. So they make time that you're going to do your homework when you get home. I'm going to reward you for the A's that you get in school, and I'm going to maybe take some pleasures away from you if you're not doing well in school, or you're not at least putting in the effort you should be, right? What we know is that kids will meet those expectations. That's why Aspire schools, Aspire charter schools work so well. All of my kids went to Aspire charter schools here in Stockton. And Aspire charter schools basically are schools that are typically started in low-income neighborhoods, and they are for the purpose of enrolling the students in those low-income neighborhoods who then, so that they can prove that kids from low-income families can achieve just as much as other kids when we provide them with the right education. So when we have high expectations of those kids, they just do exceptionally well, and it's been proven over and over again. So what that means, parents, is you need to have high expectations of your kids. Yes, doesn't mean your kids have to be straight A kids. It just means that I know you can do the work, and I'll get you help if we need to. All right, so schooling. So when we talk about different international schooling or schooling in general, what we find out is that schools can have different curriculum. The word curriculum means your learning material. So for instance, for this human development class, the curriculum that we're using is your textbook, the PowerPoint slides that you see, all of the different case studies and discussions that I'm posting online, these videos, all of this material is part of the curriculum. It's part of the learning process. And different countries and different schools have different curriculums, and that makes a difference on how well your kids do. We can see from this slide here that unfortunately the USA is actually ranked 11th here. We are not at the top of the chart when it comes to education. And this is something that we're struggling with because we are a world power. We are a great and powerful country. So there doesn't seem to be a reason why we shouldn't be achieving greatness when it comes to our math, science, and other different academic fields for our kids. So this is something that we are trying to focus on. In school, we really find that girls tend to be ahead of boys when it comes to verbal skills, and boys tend to be ahead of girls when it comes to math and science. Overall, girls do better in school, or I should say they have better, higher grades in school. However, that tends to dip or go down at puberty, and if you can guess why, the answer would definitely be attraction, or it would be boys or girls or whatever kids are attracted to that starts to interfere with their academics. All right, many of you have heard of No Child Left Behind, NCLB. So No Child Left Behind was really this act that the government did, because the government started to say, you know, we're giving schools a lot of money. Why are we scoring 11th out of all of the different countries when it comes to math? We should be higher than that. So let's do something to make these schools responsible for spending the money that we're giving to them. And what they come up with was NCLB, which really meant a lot of state testing, right? Increasing accountability through testing. And that really didn't work out very well, right? We had schools that were cheating on their test. We had all these different things happening where basically lots of kids got left behind and it didn't work out well. We have moved on to the Common Core, right? Common Core really says that there are several ways to learn something. This is, if you've seen the movie The Incredibles 2, which is one of my family's favorites, that it just came out. There's this really funny scene where Mr. Incredible is trying to help his son Dash with math. And Mr. Incredible is frustrated because he says, why did they change math? Math shouldn't change, it's the same. And many of us parents have felt that way because you're trying to help your kid with their math and you're going, what is this? I didn't learn math this way. Well, that's true because Common Core now says there are several different ways a child can learn math. And on the test, we want them to demonstrate 3 different ways to do the same problem. Most of us would say, well, gee, if they can get to the answer one way, why should they know the other 2 ways? This makes it really challenging for kids because they're almost required to do 3 times the work to come up with the same answer. So Common Core still kind of a challenge for some of the teachers and academics and children that are dealing with it. All right, so let's talk about the different types of schools because this is important. So here in the U.S., again, as I said, our U.S. federal government gives money to the states to educate the number of children that we have in that state. The state then disperses the money to schools. And there are several different types of schools. The first one is public schools. So this is the most common school we have. It's a public school where you are divided up geographically. Depending on what neighborhood you live in, your child is assigned to a particular public school. What this means is that school must use the Common Core curriculum and the curriculum that has been established by the U.S. government because the government is paying for the whole bill, right? So they're getting all public funding and they must teach whatever the government tells them to teach. Charter schools. So charter schools are a little bit different. So charter schools are public schools. Understand that they are not private. They are public schools. However, they can also, along with public funds or money from the government, they can also get private money. So for instance, Aspire Charter Schools has received grants from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So they've received lots of different private money because they do things differently than public schools. First of all, they're able to choose different curriculum. So they can pick different books. They can decide whether or not they want to have art or if they want to have PE for longer. In Aspire Charter Schools, we actually have the 1 hour longer school day than public schools, and we are in school for, I think, 19 more days out of the school year. So they do things differently. They get their money from public and private, yet they are still public schools. Private schools get no money from the public government. They actually get all of their money from what? From tuition. So in private schools, families are paying for tuition. That means that the school can really pick and choose whatever they want to do. Many private schools are religious based. So these are programs that may not want to have some teaching about sex education, or they may not want to have certain things in their schooling. They may require students to go to chapel. But private schools get money from parents. Vouchers, we really don't use this system anymore. This was a system where the government was giving low-income families vouchers and allowing them to choose other schools to go to than the neighborhood school that might be low performing, and it didn't really work well. Homeschooling is basically that you and I have the right to teach our children at home. We can actually sign a waiver that says that I will educate my kids at home. However, your child is still required to take the end of the year exam for second graders. So if your child's in second grade and you teach them at home, they still need to take an exam that shows you actually taught them at home. In this case, you will actually get money from the government to teach your child. However, that money is going to be spent on their curriculum, right? So they may need books, they may need information to do that, right? So let's go ahead and jump into our final chapter, talking about the psychosocial development of our kids here. And so again, this is the time when kids want to be a lot more independent from us. They want to separate. So children are exercising self-control, right? So look at this picture here. What if this was at my house and I said to my child, oh, let me get in there with you. Mom wants to jump in the pool with you. My child would be mortified and embarrassed that mom is going to jump in the pool with their friends, right? So this is where there's going to be some separation, right? And so this is when your kids are also going to do some things, right, without your approval or without your awareness. And be aware to kind of expect this. Hopefully you have a good enough relationship, two-way communication, that this is something that you can, manage, right? This, unfortunately, the school years are a time that our kids start to compare themselves to each other. Think about it, kids start to go to school and they start to see, oh, that girl has more clothes than I do, or they have more things than I do, and oh, wow, I feel kind of bad because, I don't have everything she has or they have. I remember when my son was in 5th grade, they went through this thing where he came home and said, Mom, I need some socks, those socks that have the swoosh on them. Those Nike socks, yeah, I need those for school. Well, son, I don't want to pay $25 for a pair of socks. If we can get them at Ross, okay, but I'm not going to pay $25 for a pair of socks. Why do we have to get these socks? Well, all the boys in my class are wearing the Nike socks, And that's what that was. It was this feeling of, my son didn't really care what was on the socks, but he felt the peer pressure to get those socks. And that's what happens with kids. Therefore, what happens is their self-esteem decreases. This should not be, but it does. So understand that as materialism, as kids start to be aware that you have and I don't have, right? I actually came from a very low income family growing up. And I remember being in school, in elementary school, and I was very aware that my mom sewed all of my clothes, right? I wanted a dress from a department store. That's what I wanted. I wanted to own something that came from the store like everyone else did. And so that you become aware of that separation. And so this is when you have to work on increasing your child's self-esteem. Remember, there's a difference between self-esteem and self-concept. Remember we said before, self-concept is if a child were to hold up a mirror to themselves, and what they see is their self-concept. So it's your child's view of how smart they are, of their personality, their abilities. So for instance, Jose might say his self-concept is, Jose might say, I'm super smart and funny, and I'm like the best boy runner on my soccer team, and I have way curly dark hair, right? That's his self-concept, right? However, self-esteem is how they feel about themselves internally. Right. So Erickson says that this stage for kids is really industry versus inferiority. So think about it. Industry is learning new skills. So our kids are learning their math facts. They're learning things in school. They're learning how to be a part of a social group. They're learning how to play on teams. And so they're developing that industry versus feeling like they're not developing those things. And they're feeling inferior with that low self-esteem. Resilience, the definition of resilience is really the ability to adapt well to significant adversity, meaning challenges, and to overcome serious stress, right? So it's really when people encounter situations, trauma, things of that nature, and they come out the other end unscathed, or they come out still being a strong person, right? They survive through it. And that's really what resilience is. Therefore, by definition, individuals who maybe come from a high income background, or they come from an environment where they've never encountered challenges or stress, can't be resilient, because you have to have encountered some challenges in order to be resilient. All right, coping. How do our kids cope? Well, one thing we need to realize is that that family structure is going to play a big role on how stressed our kids are or how healthy our kids are, what your family looks like, your family dynamics. One thing I will point out would be parentification. So parentification is when a child acts like an adult, right? So let me give you a couple examples. There's a couple ways this happens. The first way this happens is if you have a home where divorce or separation has happened. Let's say you have a 12-year-old daughter, and that daughter then goes to visit her dad every other weekend. And dad is newly separated or newly divorced. And what happens is when the daughter goes to visit dad, she ends up doing a lot of the things that mom used to do. So she ends up cooking for dad, doing dad's laundry, reminding dad, don't forget, dad, you're supposed to go to we need to go to the grocery store and get some soap. And, you know, she becomes the parent because dad really maybe is not yet caught up with those skills of being single again, right? And so she acts like the parent. And so that we can see in the case of a separation or divorce in the family structure. Another way that this happens, and this happened with me, I was a parentified child, would be if you have a home in which the parents are working long hours. So as I said, I came from a very impoverished family. My mom has 12 brothers and sisters, my father 5, and they grew up working in the fields. And so when my parents had a family, they needed to work and educate themselves. And so they both, worked full time and went to college at night. And so I, as the oldest, was left to take care of the home. So at an older age, or I should say at a younger age, I had responsibilities that were beyond my years, right? So I would take over cleaning the house, taking care of my brother, picking him up from school every day, doing all of those things. And it wasn't because my parents didn't care about me. It was because they were trying to earn the income that would provide a better life for us. And they did that. Right? And so that is another way that children can become parentified, especially if you're immigrants and you're coming to this country and your parents end up, again, having to work long hours to provide for a family. The older children end up picking up a lot of roles that parents would normally do. All right, so even though we could be twins and live in the same household, most of us are going to have different memories and ideas of what it was like to grow up. 2/3 of school-aged kids live in a 2-parent household, right? So even though we have a 50% divorce rate, the reason that this is 2/3 of kids living in a 2-parent household is because of the remarriage step family, right? That whole process is something that has definitely changed our dynamics of families. And so 2/3 of our kids. And there's different types of family structures, right? The nuclear family, meaning your immediate mom, dad, brothers, sisters, your extended family, grandparents, aunts and uncles. Some of us are very close with our extended families, right? And there's different ways that they can function. Divorce. So unfortunately, the US leads the world in rates of divorce and remarriage, right? So on average, children who are younger fare better than the older children when it comes to dealing with the challenges of having a divorce or going through separation within your family. When you go through a divorce or separation, you definitely want to do everything you can to minimize the changes for your kids. So in other words, try to keep them in the same school. You want them to have their same friends because they are going to talk to those friends about the way they're feeling about your separation or your divorce. And so try to do as much as you can to keep their world the same. So again, lots of different ways we can have a family, right? All of us come from, whether it's biological parents, whether it's step families. Again, in my case, I've adopted 2 kids and I have a foster daughter. Same-sex couple, skip generation families really means grandparents raising grandkids, right? All of these different structures constitute families. All right, the single parent home, whether it's single mom, single dad, or single grandparent, right? What we do know is that research has shown paying child support increases opportunities for successful outcomes. So at least If you are in a relationship with a partner where you are not together, at least if that person is financially supporting that child, even if they're not going to be in their life, that is very, very helpful, right? Again, I'm just trying to keep this video to a minimal time frame for you. So again, we can see that some issues that kids really deal with are going to be families that have high conflict. By that, what we mean is lots of fighting. So fighting, slamming of doors, moving around, different things like that are very stressful for kids. And then, of course, when we come from low-income families or families that don't have stability, they don't have a home, they're living with relatives, different things, that can also be really, really stressful for kids, that conflict. So far, research has shown us that same-sex couple families function very similar to heterosexual couple families, right? So the thing is, we don't yet have a lot of long-term research because we're following these families still. It's only been more recent that same-sex couples have been able to adopt and even marry. So therefore, we're still in the research gathering stages. Friendships. So your kids tend to choose their friends who share the same sex, race, and economic background. Girls tend to share secrets more and talk. Boys are a little bit more, not as much talking, but a little bit more of that, game and active play. Bullying and popular kids. So popular kids, unfortunately, in our schools are athletic, cool, dominant, arrogant, aggressive by the time they're getting into the upper elementary school years. And the unpopular kids are the ones that are ignored or neglected, right? And as we mentioned before, bullying is very, very concerning. Bullying is concerning because it really shows that the person who is the bully actually has low self-esteem. Who suffers the most? So when we look at kids who are on the left-hand side here, either dealing with kind of bullying that's not physical, it's more emotional, right? Being excluded or being talked about versus physical bullying, which one suffers the most? We're actually going to say it's the individual who deals with emotional bullying, right? Dealing with this emotional bullying compared to physical, we can get over our scrapes and bruises, but this really hurts us inside and internally, and it's very, very concerning. So how do we get rid of bullying, right? One of the reasons that bullying is still around is because kids accept bullies. That's really unfortunate. But bullies will keep bullying if other kids seem to like it or they get approval from it. And that's not good. And the way to get rid of bullying is if the whole school environment kind of does a program where bullies are seen as uncool kids, that's going to cause bullies to not want to do that. And so we need to have these whole school efforts to stop that. All right. Again, teaching kids morals. Remember, morality is about right and wrong. It's about understanding, murder and lying and things that are wrong to do. And even though we all have this kind of internal moral gauge, as parents, we have a lot to teach our kids about morality. These these kind of elementary school year ages are also prime time to teach your kids about compassion and doing for others, right? This happens to be a picture of my youngest. This is my biological daughter who felt really sad when we would pass a hungry person on the street. She felt really sad and she wanted to do something. And so I said, well, maybe we can go to a food bank and do something. And so what we did for a whole summer is every other weekend we made 250 sandwiches, and we then distributed them the next day on Saturday to the, to the food pantry, to the food bank, right? So we ended up making well over 1,000 sandwiches through the summer. But she was so excited about it, right? She loved it. This was a prime time to teach her about that. Now, understand, on Friday night, we would get together and do an assembly line. I would have the bread and the cheese that most of my coworkers would donate. And so we would collect donations and we would assemble the sandwiches as a family, right? My youngest daughter was so excited. However, my two teenagers at the time were grumbling the whole time. Why do we have to do this? If that's something she wants to do, it's Friday night. I want to go to my friends, They grumbled the whole way through. So I don't want to paint a picture to you that my life is perfect and I don't deal with some of the typical teenage things that we've got going on. I still made my kids do it. They all had to do it because we did it as a family project, right? But this is a great time to teach your kids about being compassionate. Right, those pro-social values, right? Caring about family members, caring about each other. But again, understand that your kids are not going to tell you everything that's going on. And this is why I think it's so important as a parent to be what we call the authoritative parent, which means you have structure, but you're flexible, right? Because this is a time that your kids will hide things from you. So again, for instance, we have dessert only certain nights of the week. And I let my kids have candy, on a supervised minimal basis. But if you come from a home that's authoritarian, where you tell your kids no candy, no sweets, what do you think they're going to do? What's going to happen is you're going to go in their bedroom to clean, and you'll clean out their closet or under their bed, and you're going to find like 1,000 candy wrappers, right? Because they're just going to sneak it behind your back. And as parents, it's so much more important that we develop trust and that your kids talk to you about it. So why not let your kids have certain things, at a certain degree that's okay, right? You can have my kids, I let them have soda on the weekend, right? During the week, we drink milk and water, right? On the weekend, I let them have a soda. I'm not going to, I have some structure, but I have flexibility about things because I'd rather have that than have them sneaking things when they go to their friend's house or they go buy candy and then eat it all, in their closet and hide it from me. So again, they're going to not tell you things. So try to have a great relationship so that you can at least trust what they're doing or not major issues. Okay, guys, that's about it for, again, our elementary school years, or what we call middle childhood years.